One split second in history, one violent explosion, one country's future altered forever. It was a hot summer's day in June 1981, and the future Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, has just arrived at the Abu Zar Mosque to conduct his usual Saturday prayers. As he answers questions from those who have congregated, the room's attention suddenly turns towards a strange whistling noise coming from a tape recorder sat in front of him. Before anybody has a chance to even speak, in a sudden violent flash the tape recorder explodes, with Khamenei in its path. As the crowd watched on in horror, they must have been hit with the dawning realization that the bubbling tensions inside Iran had now exploded into a lethal wave of violence. 2.5 years earlier, the last Iranian monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had been overthrown, only for his victorious opponents to now turn against each other. A group of clerics led by a man named Rewrote Khomeini had now seized power, leaving their former revolutionary allies in the dust. Ali Khamenei was one of these clerics, committed wholeheartedly to the Islamic revolution that had changed the face of an ancient society almost overnight. This made him a high-value target for assassination. He only just escaped this attempt with some pretty bad injuries, but just 8 years later he would become the country's supreme leader, a position he has now held for over 35 years. Had the assassins succeeded in their mission, then we can only guess at how different Iran might look today. Today we look at the assassination attempt of Ali Khamenei, a fork in the road that changed Iran forever. The collision course that would place a revolutionary cleric and future leader named Ali Khamenei in the same room as an assassin was set in motion a long time before. It all begins with the dramatic events of January 16th, 1979. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran's last Shah, scurries onto a plane as the last pillars of his regime finally crumble into dust. Just 8 years beforehand, he jubilantly celebrated the landmark of 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, so to say that this moment took a lot of the world by surprise would be a bit of an understatement. As the plane departs the runway, the Shah knows he will never return. An era was over, and a new one about to begin. For ready to get to work building a new government was one Ali Khamenei. A religious scholar coming from a clerical background, he'd spent much of the 1960s fiercely protesting against the Shah's rule, being arrested, exiled, and tortured by the Shah's secret police, the Savak. Now for a quick bit of context, the most followed religion in Iran is Shia Islam, and within the branch that is mainly practiced there, the most senior religious figures are called Ayatollahs. These Ayatollahs have always held large influence, and in the 1960s they stood fiercely against the Shah, deriding him as an American puppet, a brutal yet pathetic despot acting against Iranian national interests. Rewrote Khomeini, the man who would later lead the revolution, was the most influential Ayatollah and served as a mentor to Ali Khamenei. Now I know their names sound a bit similar, so to avoid any confusion I will refer to them by their full names when talking about both. Despite his best efforts, the Shah simply couldn't shut these Ayatollahs down, and they'd have the last laugh when his regime simply collapsed. Just 2 weeks after the Shah's abrupt exit, Rewrote Khomeini returned from exile to change Iran forever, with Ali Khamenei firmly in support. Referendums held that year turned Iran into an Islamic republic, and approved a constitution that made Rewrote Khomeini the country's first supreme leader, an incredibly powerful position that oversees pretty much every aspect of government. At the same time, Ali Khamenei began to climb the ladder to power. He crucially built close relationships with a new military group called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, also known as the IRGC. This group's role was to defend the revolution, or in other words, to prop up the supreme leader while swiftly crushing any opposition. For the ruling clerics were realistic enough to see that their grip on power was still a bit more fragile than they would like, and so they wasted no time whatsoever using the IRGC to clamp down on the likes of liberals, secular nationalists, and left-wing Islamic groups. To all of these groups who had played their part in helping to overthrow the Shah, it now looks like one brutal and repressive regime had simply been replaced with another. Their collective anger soon simmered towards boiling point. When the moderate president Abul Hassan Bani Sadr was impeached in June 1981, this anger exploded. The regime looked like they no longer cared about hiding their radicalism or making any effort at moderation whatsoever. Their rivals knew they had to act fast if they were to have any chance of saving the revolution, even knowing that the existence of the IRGC made their chances pretty slim. The regime, including Ali Khamenei, now found themselves in the crosshairs. Saturday, 27th of June, 1981. 5 days on from Bani Sadr's impeachment, and all hell is about to break loose. Internationally, Iran is now deeply embedded into a war with Saddam Hussein's Iraq, started over a case of ideological differences and old territorial disputes. Now, chaos and violence on the home front prepares to rear its head as well. With the war raging, Ali Khamenei returns from the front and heads to the Abu Zar Mosque in Tehran to give his regular Saturday prayers. Taking his seat and beginning to answer questions from those gathered, a young man places a tape recorder down on the table in front of him and presses play. A minute later, the strange whistling sound begins, followed by the most piercing and devastating explosion. Khamenei is the only casualty of the blast, but his injuries are hugely serious. He pulls through after weeks in hospital, but not without permanent scars, for his right arm and vocal cords are now damaged for life. The plot to kill the man who had one day become the leader of Iran had failed, Now, the regime sharpened its axes and demanded answers. Just who had been behind it? Inside the blown-up tape recorder was a written message, a gift from the Furqan group to the Islamic Republic. The Furqans were a band of radical Islamists opposed to the Ayatollahs, but by 1981 it was thought that this group had mostly vanished. Accordingly, the regime instead pointed the finger at one of their fiercest and most powerful opponents. They were called the People's Mujahideen of Iran, also known as the MEK. The MEK had been one of the groups that had worked with the clerics to kick the Shah off the throne, only to later be stung by the bitter reality of betrayal. This left-wing Islamic group wanted to use this fresh start to turn Iran into a democratic republic. In return, the clerics simply said yeah, no thanks, and instead proceeded with their own vision to build a state governed by religious jurists. The MEK later boycotted a vote on the new Iranian constitution, so for their troubles, Ruhollah Khomeini banned them from competing in the country's first presidential election. The impeachment of Bani Sadr pushed the friction between the MEK and Khomeini's Islamic Republican Party to breaking points. On the 20th of June 1981, the MEK launched a massive protest against the impeachment, drawing crowds in Tehran of hundreds of thousands. Predictably, the IRGC ruthlessly shut it down, prompting the MEK to unleash fury. Now, whether they were actually behind the attempt on Ali Khamenei's life and just used the Furqan group as cover, or if it was simply the regime trying to demonise their fiercest opponent, is not known for certain, for the man who brought in the tape recorder was never actually caught. However, what we do know is that the MEK were believed to be behind more attacks shortly afterwards, suggesting they'd masterminded this one as well. These included an attack on the Islamic Republican Party headquarters just one day after the attempt on Ali Khamenei, and another one 2 months later that killed the brand new president who had just replaced Bani Sadr. Despite their desperate attempts to swiftly decapitate the regime and hit the reset button, it all came to nothing. Ruhollah Khomeini not only stayed in power, but moved quickly to tighten his grip. As for the badly injured but still living Ali Khamenei, the attempt on his life had backfired spectacularly. Not only did surviving the attack lift his reputation to new heights, but with several high-level officials killed, the road to power had now opened up in front of him, setting in motion the path that Iran would take right up to the present day. The world did not know it yet, But Ali Khamenei's survival on that summer day in 1981 would prove to be a fork in the road, a millisecond upon which the future of Iran was settled for decades. With the presidency now once again vacant, in October 1981 Khamenei ran and was elected. At this point, the memories of the attempt on his life were still pretty fresh, and his supporters celebrated his survival as a miracle of divine intervention. This no doubt helped him in the election, as he swept to power with over 95% of the vote. In his inaugural address, he unapologetically promised to stamp out deviation, liberalism, and American-influenced leftists. It was both an ominous vow of what was to come, and a statement of commitment to following the path set out by the Supreme Leader and his long-term mentor, Rewrote Khamenei. In 1985, Khamenei was re-elected by another huge margin. Meanwhile, the chaos of the summer of 1981 had snapped the regime into launching the mother of all crackdowns. Any remaining mercy that the government had towards their rivals was about to vanish even more abruptly than the Shah. The regime declared their opponents to be apostates, painting them as not just enemies of the regime and of Iran, but as enemies of God himself. Subsequently, supporters of the MEK and other factions faced lightning-fast trials in new Islamic revolutionary courts, where execution would often follow. For the thousands that passed through these courts, there was little in the way of due process, and once a sentence was handed out, the IRGC showed no mercy. This would later be referred to as Iran's reign of terror, a whole new level of brutality that even surpassed the repression committed by the Shah. It was a brutality that the hardline Ali Khamenei supported wholeheartedly. A few years later, in 1988, he would watch on once again as the terror plunged to new depths. The combination of yet another operation by the MEK, and probably an itchy trigger finger from those in power, led to Rewrote Khamenei ordering the execution of tens of thousands of political prisoners. But this time, even some members of the regime thought Khamenei had overstepped the mark, including his planned successor, Hussein Ali Montazeri. Unsurprisingly, the dispute between the two ended with Montazeri getting a one-way ticket out of the government, and suddenly the elderly Khamenei was without an obvious successor. Now you might expect that this was the moment where Khamenei positioned himself as the heir to the throne, the natural choice to carry on the torch lit by his mentor. But there was a problem. Khamenei's religious rank was simply not high enough to be Iran's leader. The constitution explicitly stated that the Islamic Republic must be led by a Marja or Grand Ayatollah, a credential that Khamenei lacked. But fortunately for him, the Supreme Leader seemed pretty unhappy with the pool of candidates in front of him, and in one of his final acts, he requested that this requirement be removed from the constitution. He died in June 1989, and Ali Khamenei was chosen as his successor, the constitution officially being amended shortly afterwards to allow him to take the reins. The assassination attempt of Ali Khamenei proved to be one of the most pivotal moments in Iran's modern history. In one flash of light, a moment that could have killed one of the revolution's most loyal disciples instead served as a foundation that propelled him to the country's ultimate position of authority. In the 3.5 decades since, he has not only stayed loyal to Rewrote Khamenei's path, but still bearing the physical scars of those early days, he has entrenched the characteristics that mark them even more deeply. The unlimited power, the intolerance, the repression of the IRGC. Had the attempt been successful, then what would have happened next would be anyone's guess. Perhaps a different Supreme Leader, perhaps a leadership council with no single individual at the top whatsoever. Iran may look different in the future, and groups like the MEK still continue to agitate from outside the country, but there is no doubt that the last 3.5 decades have been the age of Ali Khamenei. Had that one Saturday in Tehran all those years ago gone ever so slightly differently, then who knows how different the world might look today. As always, we hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more from the Assassinations archive.